Now that the summer festivities are over, the left-wing leisure squads have graciously turned off their boomboxes and moved on, giving the rest of us the privilege of cleaning up the plastic cups and excreta from the streets of our bloated metropolis. Reminiscing on the dizzying succession of festivals and gastronomy-themed weeks that dotted the calendar, one almost forgets that our borders are still open and our traditions are still being trampled. Modern elites have reverse-engineered bread and circuses to such a degree as to make the Romans seem quaint by comparison. And with the democratization of overindulgence, even the lowliest drone can afford the finest treats, trinkets, and trivialities to dull his senses while the wool is pulled over his eyes. Those who delude themselves into believing that the dopamine peddlers have our best interests at heart should consider Proverbs 29:4. A man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. On rare occasions, a simple TV show can offer unexpected, and possibly unintended, insights into the true purpose of the entertainment factory we know and loathe. Case in point, one episode of Seinfeld has George and Jerry force-feeding some dumb shiksa turkey and mashed potatoes until she keels over so they can play with her toys. She didn't want to share because the toys had belonged to her father and they'd just ruin them. You see, our two protagonists were wise to the fact that tryptophan, an amino acid found in a variety of foods including turkey, causes drowsiness. Admittedly, there's something rather self-aware about a scene in which two Jews put someone to sleep in order to have free reign of their G.I. Joes, but maybe we're reading too much into this. Speaking of the lords of the underworld, in the 12th and final labor of Hercules, the titular hero is tasked with journeying to the depths of Hades to capture the three-headed Cerberus. Along the way, he finds Theseus and Perithous seated at a banquet table, unable, or, according to one account, unwilling, to leave. According to Apollodorus, the two heroes had been lured to the cursed feast by Hades himself, who, in what has to be the worst dinner party ever, ensnared them with serpents and turned them to stone. The second version of the story, however, is more relevant to the current topic. In it, the two hapless guests are trapped at the banquet table not by snakes, but by amnesic properties in the chairs themselves. Seated in the so-called chairs of forgetfulness, Theseus and Perithous are unable to remember who they are or where they come from, and were it not for Hercules' intercession, there they would have remained, gorging themselves obliviously until the end of time. Now, although it's more than a little generous to compare our corpulent co-ethnics with a couple of Greek demigods, there are some obvious parallels to be drawn between the tale of the Cursed Banquet and the contemporary Epicurean obsession. In a tryptophan-induced stupor, many are far too drowsy for guard duty, shuffling away from the table to nap while strangers rearrange their father's toys. In many ways, Theseus and Perithous' predicament, in both versions of the myth, is figurative of the Indo-Aryan concept of avijja, meaning ignorance, unawareness, or in some interpretations, intoxication. The ignorance that, in the second version, clouds the minds of the two heroes once they are seated, is identified in the Vedantic tradition as the root of man's enslavement to materiality. Only when this fog dissipates, through one's own efforts or through the assistance of another, Hercules in this case, is it possible to escape the underworld, so to speak. According to this interpretation, although there is no mention of the chairs of forgetfulness in the version of the myth where their legs are bound by serpents, the ignorance or unawareness is not absent, but in a sense presupposed, especially when one considers the significance of snakes in traditional symbolism. To be bound by serpents is to be shackled by earthly impulses, a fate which, as we mentioned, feeds on unawareness in order to nourish itself. A variation on this theme can be found in the story of Tantalus. Once a favorite of Zeus, the Phrygian king incurred the wrath of Olympus by sacrificing his own son, whom he then dismembered and boiled, and serving the gruesome dish in a banquet for the gods. As punishment for this heinous offense, Tantalus is submerged up to his neck in a lake surrounded by fruit trees on all sides. Yet as soon as he attempts to quench his thirst, the water dries up. When he reaches for the fruit, the trees are lifted by winds as high as the clouds. Being submerged in a lake has an additional meaning here, since water is a traditional symbol associated with becoming, separation, and inferior state more generally. The fact that Tantalus is up to his neck in it signifies the exact opposite of walking on it, namely being consumed by one's basest impulses. Underneath it all, a story in which a father who immolates his own son, i.e. posterity, is sentenced to be tempted by abundance yet unable to satisfy his urges is especially meaningful at the present time. In light of this, is it any wonder that a civilization that has forsaken its past and sacrificed its future is sleepwalking its way into a diabetic coma? Aside from being parables of the fall of man, both of these myths are illustrative of a life reduced to an animalistic level. Tantalus, Theseus, and Perithous are all trapped in the bottomless pits of their own desire. Whether the object of their pursuit is real or a mirage is secondary. Manufacturing need and ensuring compliance are two sides of the same coin, an example of what in business jargon is known as horizontal integration, and when existential angst is added to the mix, profits soar. At the nexus of these three industries there is a banquet and an infinite number of chairs. Fortunately, liberation is as easy as letting go of the long spoons and stepping away from the table.